Welcome back to the Don't Worry About It podcast, where we talk all things mental health related, from anxiety to depression, from happiness to sadness, and all emotions and feelings in between. On today's episode, I invited my friend Noam Lubofsky to join the podcast to talk about his experience with mental health, how he dealt with the passing of his father, dealing with the army, and many, many other topics. This conversation went really in depth on a lot of personal things, and I want to thank Noam for coming on and really sharing. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Noam, welcome to the Don't Worry About It podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to have received the invite.
I'm really, really excited, and I think it's going to be a really strong conversation. Let's get straight to it. Noam, what has your experience been like with anxiety and mental health?
Right. So I'll kind of just start from the beginning. When for those who know me, my dad, Oliver Shalom, passed away when I was 15 years old. And when that happened, a little bit down the road, I kind of was able to look back on my childhood and realize, how dependent I was on his approval. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. The best way I can describe it might sound like a little bit funny, but, if you have a movie where the main character says something like, all I ever wanted to do was make you proud, Pop. Like, I was able to look back on my childhood and see how much I had that mentality of just wanting to make my dad proud and impress him, or, whatever it was, to the extent that, I would look to see approval from him in things that didn't even have to do with me. Like, to see him impressed with anything in the world that had nothing to do with me, like, did something for my, that sense of approval from him. I don't know if that makes so much sense, but, then when he passed away, I was kind of left with this void of not necessarily feeling like I had that approval or that I had made him proud, which isn't necessarily the case, but for whatever reason, I was left feeling like that. And, it's one thing to have those needs, while a person is alive, and to feel like you're not necessarily, filling them and having that need that you have filled. And then when the person passes away, it kind of leaves that void of, now I never made that person proud and I'll never be able to, which for me personally, and I'd say the first, kind of experience that I had dealing with any kind of, emotional problems or whatever you want to call it, was that kind of left me looking for approval everywhere and looking for, a way to impress people everywhere, which was a burden and is sometimes still a burden, because it leaves me, constantly thinking about what other people are thinking of me in every situation when it's not at all even relevant. And, that's kind of like my intro. And then there's other things that stem from that I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about when you were talking about, you were constantly seeking approval. Can you explain, give me an example of something that you would do?
Are you asking when my dad was alive or afterwards?
Yeah, when your dad was alive, you mentioned that. I was interested in learning a little bit more about that.
Right. So I don't think I did such a great job explaining that, so I apologize. What I mean is, when I was looking a couple of years after my father passed away, I was able to look back on my childhood and realize, how much as a kid I looked for his approval. So I don't mean to say that I would go out of my way for it. I just mean to say that, it was something that I wanted and something that I would look for, in anything that I would do, any standard thing that a kid would do, I would look for my dad's approval, for him to feel like he was proud of me or whatever it was. And then that need went so, for whatever reason, didn't feel like it was being fulfilled, that it kind of branched out to me looking to see him impressed by anything. And even, I have memories of my dad just saying that he liked something, or, that he was impressed by something that had nothing to do with me. And even that, kind of did something for me. So I don't mean to say that I, went out of my way to try and impress him. But, I definitely felt like that was something that I needed to feel.
It's very interesting to hear. I'm curious, when you were able to, right, as you get older, look back on these things, what do you think it was?
It's a great question. I think, my dad was, he was a great person, and he was a very passionate person, and he felt things very strongly. And I think that, a person like that can be a little bit hard to impress and sometimes have high expectations. And I think that he definitely had high expectations of me. And, I wasn't always the strongest student, as you know. So, I don't think I always felt like I was meeting his expectations in terms of my academic work and stuff in school and behavior. I wasn't a well-behaved kid at all either. So I think there were a lot of things that led me to feel like I disappointed him, and not that he expressed that to me, but that could have just all been in my own head. And I think that led to a more and more, ongoing feeling of wanting that sense of approval that I didn't feel like I had.
And when you years later, I guess a few years later, were able to make that realization, how did that impact your life moving forward?
Right. So like I said, I think that it really turned me into this person who, I now have this void of like, okay, I always wanted to make my dad proud. I always wanted to feel like he was proud of me and impressed by me. And now he's gone, and I don't feel like I accomplished that. And I'm not saying that he wasn't, of course, I'm not saying that. And I'm sure everyone would say he would, but for me, that feeling is missing, and that creates a big void in a person. It's a pretty big deal. And I think for me moving forward, that led me to have this sense of just needing to gain approval or impress people or whatever it is in any way that I can, which then, in turn led to me being the type of person who just constantly worries about what people are thinking of me all the time. It could be walking down the street, it could be having a conversation, it could be anything. I'm pretty much, and I've gotten better at it. I've worked on it, and there are definitely things that we could discuss in terms of how I've tried to work on it a little bit. But it's definitely been a burden. But it's the kind of thing that can be worked on and can be kind of consolidated a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely something I want to touch on, but for now, I want to stay inside. You found out. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but do you remember what it was like when you found out that you're actually, for the listeners, can you, if you don't mind, explain how your dad passed away?
Yeah, of course. So my dad was diagnosed with leukemia at basically when we first started high school. Like, I think it was the first month, September of whatever year we started high school. So that would have been 2009. And then he was sick for around a year. He was really, he had leukemia. A lot of people survive leukemia. And he was sick for around a year, and he was waiting for a bone marrow transplant, and which is what he needed. But the problem with leukemia is that your immune system is very, very weak, so you could get sick very easily, and they can't do the bone marrow surgery if you get sick. So he kept getting like small things like a cold or a little flu, and they kept having to push off the surgery. And after 13 months, a little bit over a year, he was in the hospital most of the time throughout that period, but he was home sometimes. And he was able to be at my brother's bar mitzvah shortly before he passed away, thank God, which was really special and amazing that he was able to be there. And then after around 13 months, things kind of went south very, very, very fast. To tell you the complete truth, I don't even know all the details of it. All I know is that, within a few days, he all of a sudden, a bunch of different things went wrong all at the same time. I remember hearing, it was the kind of situation where had it just been one of the things, it would have been treatable. But I think it was like three big things all together. Again, I don't know exactly what they were, but, three big things kind of all came together at once, and it just wasn't treatable anymore. He wasn't curable. And so just like that, like within 2-3 days, he passed away, so it was definitely a shock, a big, big shock for me. Emotionally, I completely shut down, which also definitely had its effects on me. And the only reason I didn't bring that up as much is because I don't have as much to say about it, just in terms of what to do with that. Like, emotionally, I shut down, and I still struggle with that. And, letting my emotions out in certain ways because of that.
What do you mean by you shut down emotionally? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I just, I remember, I remember the whole day. I was probably with you. If we were in the same gym class that year, I was in gym, and I remember the school secretary came running downstairs and told the gym teacher something, and the gym teacher told me to go upstairs, and a friend of mine's older brother drove me to the hospital, and I had no idea what was going on. And I remember getting there, and I remember my mom, coming to me and crying and telling me that, he's dying, and I was just in shock. It was the entire time he was sick. It was with the expectation that he was going to get better and that everything was going to be okay. And then, I just remember sitting in the hospital room, and he was already, the hardest part about it. Well, I shouldn't say the hardest part. One of the hardest parts about it was that by that time he was already not really so conscious. So it wasn't even like I could talk to him or say goodbye or get any kind of closure that I needed. Which obviously, based on some of the other stuff I said, would have been, pretty big for me to be able to have some kind of final conversation. But so by the time anybody knew that, he was kind of going, he was already gone mentally. So I just remember sitting in this hospital room, like, I didn't cry. I didn't shed one single tear that whole time. I remember just sitting there, and I remember hearing my mom behind me, like, talking to her friends about how she was concerned that I wasn't crying, which she had a right to be. And, I don't know exactly why that happens. I don't think that that's something that I had struggled with up until that point. But, I think that just the shock of it and the implications that it had just was so much that emotionally I just shut it all down and didn't really let anything show. And I remember at Shiva, the week-long mourning period afterwards, we had, I had friends coming nonstop that our school was sending, which was amazing of them. And I remember I had no interest in talking about it. I even remember one teacher who came with a group of kids said, like, Noam, do you want to talk about your dad at all? And I remember just saying no. Like, it wasn't something I wanted to talk about. It wasn't something I was ready to, I think, really, like, feel and open myself up to and, let myself break down about, which has definitely had its, implications now, far down the road. It's something that I still struggle to do in terms of, really breaking down emotionally, which sometimes you got to do. And, that's something I struggle with, I think, because of that time in my life when I not made the decision to shut down, but it kind of happened.
It's really interesting to hear because I mean, I'll never forget. I remember the day in school when I found out where I remember exactly where I was. I remember exactly who broke the news to me. I remember because we were very close, and one of the faculty members, they were calling us all to an assembly, our whole grade, to tell us something, and I knew that you weren't in school, and I knew about your dad's situation, and I made eye contact with one of the teachers, and they had a look on their face, and in that moment, I didn't know, but I in a way I knew, and he pulled me over the side and he told me, and I remember in that moment just knowing that, like, kind of for you, just how as your friend, just not being able to see you in that moment and just not being able to, knowing just as your friend not knowing what to do, and this changed for you. It's changed your entire life, and at this point, I hadn't really gotten to know your family yet, but for those that don't know, Noam and I he's one of my closest, if not my closest, one of my closest friends, and his family's very close to me now, and we've gotten very close, and it's just been so interesting to watch and so emotional to watch you and your family deal with the loss at the moment, and then watching it now. I don't know, and I remember the day of the funeral, and I remember the week of Shiva where we were all, we all found out what happened. We'd have these conversations, and it just felt weird that not being able to talk to you about it, and we were all having these conversations, and at the whole time I'm just like, kind of want to talk to my friend about it. And then I forced my way onto the bus multiple times. I said, I'm not in school for going. I need to see my friend. And I do remember, Shiva period, and you seem so calm, not calm in a way, but you seem so in terms of, you just had no interest in talking about it. You just wanted to be, I don't know if distracted is the word, you just wanted to, it seemed like you wanted to feel normal again. Does that make any sense?
Right. Yeah, I think you're spot on, and you're describing exactly what anybody would have been seeing, which was that I had no interest in dealing with it. I had no interest in talking about it. Um, there were there were a couple of times when I was able to feel emotional about it. I remember, at the funeral itself. I think the first time I cried, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, I believe the first time I cried was after he had died, and at the funeral, after the whole funeral, I remember like hugging one of my closest friends who was also very close with my dad afterwards outside. And I don't know what it was, but I had hugged like a trillion people that day. But when I was hugging this friend who had like a really close relationship with my dad, also, I remember just breaking down. Not for a long time, maybe like 20 seconds, but it was something. And, after that, there was a couple other times when I, was able to show some form of emotion. I remember writing an essay for an English class that we were in on it, a pretty long essay just about my feelings about it and stuff like that, stuff I learned from my dad. But yeah, just in terms of crying, in terms of just crying and breaking down, something I'm sure we'll talk about this also later in our conversation, but sometimes you just gotta be sad, and sometimes you just gotta break down in order to truly move on. And I don't think I ever did that. And the longer you wait, and the farther down the road you get, and the farther away you get from that thing that caused you the pain, the harder it is to really get back to it and to break down over it and to feel at least a little bit of consolation over it. So, but yeah, that's how I handled it for whatever reason.
I want to circle back and I want to go a little deeper into that, but I do want to take this time as we're there talking about crying, because I know it's a conversation we've actually had a few different times over the years. There's something so interesting about crying and what it is. It's, to me, I've had trouble, emotionally and dealing with my own emotions, and crying's been something that I never had a problem with up until like the last few years, where I find it very difficult to feel. I think it's a lot to do with myself turning my own emotions off, but crying, I think, is such a healthy, normal part of life. And it's gotten in a way stigmatized, where when when you're in a scenario where you watch somebody cry, it becomes very uncomfortable. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it's a very uncomfortable moment watching somebody cry. And when you see somebody cry and you see it, people have the necessity, right, to comfort, but the way they comfort is not, I think, the right way or the best way to do it, because you automatically go, it's okay, no need to cry. You do it. People do it with their kids when they're very young and they cry. Sometimes it's over nothing, but sometimes they're having a real emotional outburst, and the quickest thing people do is basically tell them to stop crying.
Right.
But I feel like that's a wrong approach.
Right. I definitely hear you. I mean, look, I do think there's a difference between having little kids and having little kids stop crying versus if there's something that an adult is going through. It makes me think of, and I was actually thinking about this in the context of our conversation. I thought that it was going to come up in the context of something else, but it's interesting that it's coming up now. But did you ever see the movie Inside Out?
Yes, I actually saw it with you. You said we were hanging out one day, and you said, "We're going to the movies. You got to see this movie."
Yeah, it's an amazing movie. And so anyway, if anyone hasn't seen this movie listening, here's a spoiler, so maybe fast forward a few seconds if you haven't seen it yet. But the whole point of the movie is the whole plot is you have the emotion of joy. It's trying so hard to make this kid happy by suppressing the sadness and by getting rid of the sadness and keeping the sadness occupied and doing other things, and trying so hard to make the kid happy, which in the end is only making things worse and worse and worse. And the whole climax of the movie is when the sadness is finally allowed to do her job, so to speak, and come to light, and the girl is able to cry, and and that ultimately is what allows the person to feel better. So I think that just pretending to be happy and just pretending to be okay, it can be really dangerous in the long term. And sometimes you got to cry, you got to be upset, you got to take a little bit of time. It doesn't mean to let it completely destroy you or let it completely take over your life, but a good healthy cry, it's something I've been craving for a long time. I actually, I can't even tell you how, in terms of just shutting down, just to give you a better sense of what I mean, as ever since then, there's been times, many times, when I've felt the urge to cry. I felt the tears coming on, whether it be watching a sad scene in a movie or, much more so, the times that I've visited my dad's grave. And I can't even tell you how many times I have this one distinct memory of being there with my family. We go every year before Yom Kippur, for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And I remember being there and we had like a family hug and it was emotional. And I remember starting to walk away and like never been more ready to cry. Like all the feelings inside of crying, eyes are ready, feeling it inside my throat, like everything's ready to cry. And then I remember just shutting down. So I got to the point where my body was shutting down for me. It wasn't a conscious thing. I was ready to cry. I would have cried, but I got to this point where, my mind was so used to it that I would just shut down. The most and just on the other side of things, I recently, right before I got married, the day before I got married, almost a year ago, I went to my dad's grave the day before I got married with my uncle and my grandma. So my dad's brother and my dad's mother, who I had never been there with before. So it was like a different experience. And my dad had 3 brothers. And the one who I went with that day he's the one who like just reminds me most of my dad in terms of just looks and, everything of his voice and just everything, but definitely the person in the world who reminds me most of my dad. And so just being there with him, and he started crying, and then I, started really crying, which was a really special feeling. And it was a really, big thing for me to be there that day. And, it was obviously really emotional. So I was happy. And so this is the perfect example that the fact that I cried there made me so happy that I was able to feel that emotion and let it out and feel more connected to my dad than I had in a long, long time by actually letting myself feel it and embrace it a little bit, embrace the fact that he's not here and how sad that makes me, that could, bring me a little bit of consolation, make me a little bit happier. So I think that's, just obviously there's a ton more to talk about, but just a glimpse into, how sadness and how crying, it's good and it's important.
Absolutely. I mean, I cannot even imagine the moment of power, what it must have felt like. We kind of went the timeline, right? We started in freshman year of high school, and now got married almost a year ago. In a month, it'll be about a year. And to go full circle, obviously, there's a lot in the middle, and we're going to get into that. But it must have been, kind of being able to finally let that out in such a powerful moment that you shut down, finally letting it break through. What do you think it was that allowed you to finally turn on those emotions and allow yourself to feel in that capacity?
I think it was a couple things. I think it was the fact that I was there with my uncle and my grandma, my dad's brother and his mom. So I think that was like a big part of it for me. Another part of it was the fact that, my uncle started bawling, which was like I remember we got out of the car, and I remember he just and he's like a big guy, like tall, big, like not like, doesn't look like, a crier. And I remember he just got out of the car and looked at the grave, and after a couple seconds just got super emotional and looked at me. And I remember he said, he's not where he should be. And we just, all 3 of us just started bawling. And, and another part of it for me was, this is, throughout there's nothing, obviously getting married is one of the most important things you're going to do, so to know that he wasn't going to be there and to be at his grave the day before, and, to just kind of have to accept wow, you're not going to be there. You're never going to meet my wife. That's hard stuff. That's emotional stuff. That's a next level of, not on top of, not being with him as I'm growing up, that's him not being there and not being there for this new stage of my life and never even getting to see it, at least here, I think that was really emotional. And then to top it all off, I thought that something really nice to do would be to, I brought an invitation and I put it on top of his grave, And that was like, I'm getting emotional just talking about it now, because that was like the cherry on top of the cake that like killed me. That made me super duper emotional that day. But in a good way. It helped me feel really connected to him, and really feel like those emotions that I had shut out for a long time.
Wow, that's just I'm picturing it as you're describing it. I'm completely feeling an unbelievable amount of emotions, and just seeing the scene. It must have been completely overwhelming. And I want to, I guess, go a little bit back as we got to the wedding, and going back to high school. You mentioned that you turned your emotions off. Did you have any idea, I guess, of what? Oh, you're right. Sorry, sophomore year of high school, your dad passes away. How did you? What happened? I guess in terms of your mental health, like, how did it manifest? I guess for those next couple of years, right in high school, it's high school's, as it is, one of the hardest times for a lot of people, and to add losing your dad, who's played such an important role in your part. How did that affect you in those ages? And actually, I want to, I guess, sorry to actually ask this question a little differently. How did it impact your relationship with your family?
Right. So I'll go in order. In terms of how it affected me in high school, it's a really good question. And honestly, I don't even really have a good answer, because I think, first of all, it's so long ago, which is so crazy, but we were in high school so long ago that it's like hard to really remember exactly what my life was like day to day and what my feelings were like day to day. I can say that there was definitely an aspect of that shutting down and having shut down. So I wasn't necessarily feeling that. But in terms of what I spoke about, what I'm trying to think about right now is in terms of what I spoke about at the very beginning, in terms of, feeling the need to always impress people. And, did I have that then? Did I have those, struggles then and those needs then? I'm not totally sure, to be completely honest with you. I don't remember having it, but then again, I don't remember exactly when that would have started. So I would imagine at least to an extent. I also think that it's the kind of thing that I realized a little bit later, a little bit few years down the road is when I started to realize some of the implications of my dad's passing, that, in the ways that it affected me. But right afterwards, in terms of the years after high school, the years towards the end of high school, sorry, I think that I was just emotionally ignoring it. And then to kind of segue into how it affected my relationship with my family, I think that it's tricky because, every single person, anyone who loses a parent, while it can be viewed as, oh, this person lost their parent and this person lost their parent, so they went through the same thing. While in a sense, of course, that's true, every single person experiences that tragedy extremely differently. You have people who lose their parents at different ages. You have people who have different relationships with their parents. There's a billion factors that lead to how a person deals with that kind of thing emotionally. So, I have two younger siblings, a brother and a sister who you know very well, who, both, I couldn't even tell you so much about how it affected them, because the truth is, part of my shutting down emotionally, I think, was shutting down the family emotionally. And what I mean by that is that, I'm the oldest, and I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of things fell on me in terms of kind of keeping the family together. Obviously, I don't mean to say my mom did a ton, like an unbelievable amount of, and the way she handled things was, unbelievable. So I don't mean to take away from that at all, but just in terms of, keeping the family dynamic, or rather even creating a new family dynamic, I think that a lot of that was on me. And I think my family would agree. So, and I think that I did a good job in a sense. And I think that I brought us all together in a lot of ways. My regret there would be that I think that my attitude of shutting down emotionally kind of passed on to everyone else, at least to my siblings, in terms of talking about that, at least with each other. So our family relationship, got good. This is, you're talking at a time where, right before this, I was like much younger and still at the age where like you're fighting with your siblings nonstop. And then after this, they're like kind of already at the age where that kind of stuff stops. So that transition was kind of in that time period where, okay, my siblings and I aren't fighting anymore. We're more like young adults. We're getting along now. And, I definitely had struggled with my mom just in terms of me being a punk teenager and not, behaving or listening or whatever it was. But so our family dynamic definitely, it changes when you lose a piece of the puzzle, the whole thing changes, and everything changed in terms of our family dynamic. Baruch Hashem, thank God, now we are all extremely close. I think closer than we ever were. And, but in terms of that, emotional side of things, I think that that's something that's lacking there because of me.
The word that comes to mind just listening and is the word strong. I was close with you, and I was always in awe of your strength, your ability to just handle emotions, and not only. And I remember at this time you're for those who don't know you, you're always somebody who allows people to put their burdens onto you, and I was always in awe of watching you. I know I came to you with some of my troubles, and I know you're a very sociable, very likable guy. You had a lot of friends, and I know you were able to have some really deep conversations, and people put their burdens on you. I was always in awe of how you were able to handle it. I to this day, I still don't. I don't even know how you were able to not only deal with your however you handled your own, but you were able to deal with other people's issues at the same time. It's kind of, to me, I can't. It's hard for me to even comprehend it. I'm just in awe of it. And in terms of your family, I've had the pleasure. I got to meet your mother a few months later when I came to your house for the Sabbath, and we spent a really fun weekend. And I got to know your siblings. And I was the first moment when I got to know your mom, and I was talking with your brother and your sister, who I'm very close with now. But looking back on it then, we weren't, and they were also just at such a young age too. All of you were so strong, and your mother just so strong that if you looked at all of you from the outside, you would and talked with them and talked with you guys, you would never have guessed that you had that your family had suffered such a tragedy. You would never guess it.
Right. So, I mean, I think in terms of the first thing you said, in terms of allowing me to, allow others to place their burdens on me, I think that that's something that a lot of people, and I could be wrong, but my gut would be to say that a lot of people have that. And, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I would say that a big part of that is the, putting one's emotional needs aside so that they can, talk to others. A lot of people are much more willing, and, it's much easier for people to, help other people with their problems and to help themselves. You know what I mean? So I think that that's a big part of it. And why that's something, I still to this day, I love talking to people and trying to help people with anything that they're going through. But, sometimes at the cost of, letting my own emotional needs kind of fall at the wayside.
I think that's a really good point, because I think that happens a lot when you, I know when I couldn't deal with my own emotions, sometimes you just got to numb it in whatever way you can. But another great way to do it is to reach out to somebody else and have them tell you their problems, and you help them with their problems. But at the same, and that while that's all, it's a great thing to do. But if you don't take care of your own issues, well, then eventually the price eventually I've learned with emotions, and you alluded to later, it all comes. Eventually you have to pay the price. If you don't handle something in its moment, and you don't actually deal with it, eventually, it comes back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to transition a little bit, post high school, we spent the gap year together. And after that you decided to join the Army. And if I'd be interested to know a little bit about why you decided to join the Army.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always had, really deep love for Israel, even before I was religious. I always had a lot of family there and a lot of friends there, and I always loved it there. I always knew I wanted to go for the year. I didn't plan on going to yeshiva, but one of our rabbis from high school actually, through my relationship with him, was kind of inspired to go to yeshiva for the year. And while I was there, and you're living there for the year, and you're developing an even deeper love for the country, and I just remember feeling like, okay, I want to live in Israel when I'm older, if I'm going to live here, I want to feel like I play my part. Everyone who lives in Israel plays their part for the most part in terms of going to the army or serving in some way. So I really wanted to feel like, okay, if I'm living here and I want to end up here, I want to be able to feel like I have already, done my part. So that was kind of the mindset. That was the mindset. And then, do you want me to go through the journey of entering and everything that happened?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I think it takes a lot of strength and courage to enter the army. I think a lot of people want to do it. Very few people have that initial courage and are actually able to follow through with joining the army. And I know that you ended up leaving the army, and I'd love to hear from your perspective just what it was like dealing with the exit process of the army.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened with the army is, so like I said, I decided during our first year in Israel that it was something that I wanted to do. And, keep in mind, I wasn't religious in high school. I got, just on my own, not my family or, and a lot of times people think it has to do with my dad and a rebellion against God. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a lack of connection and, a lack of caring, which led to, less and less observance. And, so we go to Israel for the year and we're getting more religious, kind of. And I decided I wanted to go to the army. And then, I was going to draft into the army at the beginning in November of the following year. So of our second year then in Israel. And I remember, so we finished that first year and then we go to Israel for the second year and, we're in our program for, a month or two. And then I draft, looking back, I can see so clearly that the army, it was, and ways this is good. I had made the decision to draft. I made the decision to draft, and it kind of stuck with me the whole way through. So meaning I made the decision to draft early on in our first year there. And then, throughout our year, we're making all this growth and learning so much and changing who we are as people and our views on things and, how we want to live our lives. And then, but throughout all that, the army decision never changed for me. It was always something that I was going to do. So then, which with everything that was happening and all the growth and changes that I was making to my life, probably should have been something that was reassessed. For whatever reason, it wasn't. But so then I go back to Israel. I draft into the army.
Wait, I want to pause there.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had committed to it, and then you felt like if I don't, did you feel like stuck in because you'd made a decision previously, like that's what you wanted to do? Did you feel like you had to go through with that?
No, sorry. So thank you for clarifying. If I made it seem like that, I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that I made the decision, and then it kind of was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to the army, and it never changed. Like no part of me was ever like, oh, should I go? Should I not go? I'm changing. Should I stay in yeshiva for the year? That thought process never happened. It was always like once I made the decision that I'm going, it was in my head and it never went away.
Okay. No, I'm just curious. I know sometimes when people make decisions and then they go public, they start telling people, hey, I'm going to this. They feel like the pressure they had now like they feel like they paint themselves in the corners if I don't go.
Right. And that's something that I've definitely struggled with post army, which I'm sure we'll get to. So I go to the army and it's hard. And it's hard for not any of the reasons that I'm sure most people would think that it's hard. Look, it's the army. It's hard. The physical work is hard. The waking up early is hard. The being bossed around all day is hard, But at the end of the day, the hard parts were not what people would think are the hard parts. The hard parts were, not really having any friends. The hard parts were, the culture shock that happens. It's so wild. And I always remember how, shocked I was about it that, I spent my whole life going to Israel and, I went to camp in Israel during the summers, but never realized that in all those experiences, I was always surrounded by Americans. And this is my first time being in a situation where I'm surrounded fully by Israelis. And it's really like the term explains it perfectly. It's a culture shock. These people are, not that I have anything against them, obviously, They were great guys, but you're just so different. Your personalities are different. When you grow up in a completely different world, everything about you is different. So it's hard to connect in a way. At least for me, it was, especially having spent our gap year program in like the most American place in all of Israel, so, so that was hard. That was hard. And then another aspect of it for me was, that I go to the Army and all my friends are having the time of their lives, and, our second year of our program, and, I'm in the Army, getting yelled at all day and doing stupid, basic training work and, all this stuff. So that was my like beginning of the Army, so as I'm going, all those feelings are, still there, and I'm going through basic training and all this stuff. And then, I finished basic training, and I got permission from one of my commanders, one of my higher up commanders, to go back to America for like a little vacation, which was amazing. And, you're usually not allowed to do that early in your service, but I got special permission for whatever reason. I guess he liked me. And then, so I go to America, and then once I'm back in America, I kind of am just like, it was, you get super comfortable, you're out of the Army, back in America, back home. And, I was home for around 2 weeks. And I remember, towards the end, I think it was even the day I was supposed to get back on a plane, I remember saying to my mom, like, I can't go back. Like, I can't go back to that. I don't want to do that anymore. Also, sorry, I'm just going to backtrack for 1 second. I forgot to mention, the biggest thing for me in terms of the decision to leave the Army was that, I was having all those feelings and all those thoughts throughout my, while the few months that I was in the Army about, that I was sad and miserable there, and, all my friends are having the best time, and I'd rather be with them, and I don't have any friends here. But the main thing for me that made me feel like, okay, wow, I actually want to get out of here, was that I kind of realized, if you're a religious person, which at that point, thank God I believe I had become, if you're a religious person, serving in the Army, the Israeli Army, is, a form of service of God. If you believe that Israel is the Jewish homeland, then you inherently have to believe that protecting it and serving it, that is in its own way a service of God. So what I kind of realized was, okay, I can either serve God in this way for, a year and a half here and risk not building the religious foundation that I need in order to serve him for the rest of my life. Because meaning for me, I was, like I said, I wasn't religious in high school. And then, you go to this program and, you gain a lot in your first year, but you need more, you need more structure to really, be able to grow more on your own and learn and have that religious foundation. And I didn't have that yet. So I kind of realized, wow, I can either, like I said, I can either serve Hashem in this way for a year and a half and risk not having that foundation to serve him in other ways for the rest of my life, or I can be in my yeshiva program and, build that foundation to serve him in other ways, for a lifetime. So that when I made that realization, I remember making that realization and just being like, wow, I actually have to leave. I have to get out of here. So fast forward again. So I'm back in America. I decide that I really can't go back, and I really need to go back to yeshiva, to our program in Israel. And, a lot of people, I'm sure, if you know me, if you kind of know the story of me in the Army, I know from my conversations with people, a lot of people kind of assume that I ran away from the Army, which is, a fair assumption. It's fine. It's not true. I kind of got permission to stay with the understanding. It was like kind of unofficial permission, that we got through this guy who, whatever, that's a whole complicated, connection, how we met this guy. Mm-hmm. But, through this guy, we were able to get kind of an unofficial permission for me to be in America and stay as long as I, spoke to a therapist basically, and had the therapist deem me, not mentally fit to be in the Army.
I want to talk about, the emotions and feelings that you were going through in the Army. I mean, I was in yeshiva. I went back for that second year, and I remember. I'll never forget dropping you off at the army, and for me and for a bunch of us and your close friends in Shiva, it was a really hard time for us knowing because when you'd come back when you had your off weekends and we would see you and we could see the. I remember the first time you came back and I saw a look in your eye and it was a look I'd never seen before really in you, and it was a look of you just looked miserable. You looked completely miserable. You looked off. It was not the Noam that any of us had known, and that was when we were all like, "This is not good." And I don't know if you were capable at that time of expressing it in terms of talking about what you were going through, but I cannot imagine what you must have emotionally been going through, knowing that this just wasn't for you. Such at a certain point,
Right.
what was that? What was it? What was going through your mind when you were on the army base? What was going through your head?
I mean, when I was on the army base, I wanted to be out of there. I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to, and there were times when it was fun. Going onto the shooting range, some hikes. The army had its good moments. It really did. And I finished the basic training and I did it, and it definitely had things that I feel I gained experiences from and experiences that were fun at the time. But overall, the best way I can tell you is that I'm happy you brought up those weekends that I would come back to yeshiva, because I think for me those weekends those are the first time I really feel like I really felt anxious about something, to the extent that even now in my life, however many years later, if I start to feel anxious about something, a lot of the times what I'll do is I will think about my anxiety from the army and how anxious I was then. And I'll just be able to think like, wow, thank God things are so much better now. It's really not that bad. I remember, I would come back to Reishi for Shabbos, and, on Saturday nights, I would lay in bed and knowing that I had to wake up at like 5 a.m. the next morning to get on like 3 buses to get back to my base. And I remember sitting in bed with like this pit in my chest, like at the thought of having to do that and having to, not getting to just stay there with all of you, and, having to wake up so early and make this trek to a place that I didn't want to be. And, I remember the bus rides, sitting on the buses with headphones on, just like wishing that the bus ride would never end. Like I literally never wanted it to end. I never wanted to get there. And so that's really, honestly, the first time in my life I can ever say for sure that I felt like a pretty, intense level of anxiety about something.
Was there anybody on the army base that you could talk to about it?
So I definitely had some friends. There was like a group of Americans in my unit, and I had a culture shock with them in a different way. We were all very different, but it was nice to just have like nice English speaking Americans there to just talk to and be friendly with. But in terms of talking about struggles like that, no, I didn't have anyone there who I was, talking to. And I made connections with people, and my commanders were all super nice to me. My all from my most basic commander to all the higher ups. Like I said, one of the higher ups is the one who gave me permission to go back to America much earlier than I should have been allowed to. They all were sensitive to me. They knew that I was having a hard time, which I really appreciated. I would speak a lot to, every base has like a psychologist who I would speak to a lot. Everyone knew that I was struggling with something. Everyone knew that I didn't love it there and that I was having a hard time, which was definitely helpful, to have that feeling that people understood and that people were sensitive towards it. But at the end of the day, it didn't solve the big problem.
Was this the first time in your life that you felt that anxiety or these emotions?
I think so. Like I said, I think, we're talking about my dad died in high school. And then, I kind of go through high school blocking out emotions. And then we go to our first year in Israel, which is like the best year ever, just having the best time and, all good things. And then, okay, all that fun stuff is gone. You're going to the army, which is really hard, and you're away from all your friends and all this stuff. And I think that was the first time that I, because up until then, through high school, everyone's in high school. You're with your friends, and then you go to this gap year and you're with your friends and everyone's doing the same thing and it's all fun and you're not really doing anything you don't want to do. And all of a sudden you're in this place for the first time as like an adult-ish kind of, and it's like, I don't want to be here and I'm stuck and I don't have a choice and there's no way out. And so, yeah, I think that was the first time I really felt at least any form of severe anxiety.
Mental health is such a big, it's such a huge component of your makeup. And it sounds like you really were having a real mental health crisis here and you really needed to get out. And luckily you were able, luckily you had a commander that was able to grant you that permission and you came home. When you got that leave, were you planning on coming back?
It's a great question. I was planning on coming back. I remember I surprised my family. I reached out to my grandma, who's great. Shout out grandma.
Shout out grandma.
I asked my grandma if she would, pay for my tickets so that I could surprise my family. And, I had her buy me a round trip ticket. So I wouldn't have had her, pay for that money for that ticket back went out the garbage, So I just mean to say that I wouldn't have asked her to buy a round trip ticket if I only planned on going one way. You know what I mean?
Right. So let's fast forward. You said it was the day of. You're supposed to get on a plane. Talk me through that day.
Right. So I remember I was literally supposed to get on a plane in the afternoon, and I think once that day came, I knew in my mind, like, I'm not getting on that plane today. Like, I knew I was not getting on that plane, and it was just a question of like telling my mom, I'm not getting on that plane. And I remember I was just pushing it off later in the day, and it was probably, I don't know if it was far away from the time we were supposed to go or closer to the time we were supposed to leave to the airport. But I remember just being in the kitchen and saying to my mom, I can't go back. I just can't do it. And I remember going and speaking. I don't remember. I guess my mom wanted me to talk to, a lady in our community who we're very close with, who has a son who was in the Army, and she wanted me to go talk to her. And I don't remember our conversation so well. I'm close with her. I used to live in their house in high school, and I don't remember the conversation so well, but I do remember the gist of it being her really encouraging me to not go back. And she had a son who was extremely successful in the Israeli Army, but I remember me just telling her everything and talking her through everything that I was feeling and thinking. And I remember her, really saying, it's not good for you. It's not healthy. It's not what you should be doing. And we'll figure something out. We'll figure a way out. I'm not going to run away and never be allowed back into Israel. I would never do that. I would never accept that or be okay with that. But, we're going to figure something out. And I actually remember that conversation being the thing that made me feel okay with the decision to kind of stay and not go back and feel like I was supported in that decision and people understood. So yeah.
That's unbelievable that you were able to. Well, first I want to touch on the point. I think it's a very common thing that happens for people who have that severe anxiety about something like that, and it gets to a point where it becomes, and it sounds in a way a little childish, but it's really not if you experience it, where it's I'm not going. Wherever someone wants you to do something, you need to do something, you need to go something, and it becomes I can't do it. I'm not doing it, and it gets so bad where the point when people try and force you to do it, you're like, and you can't explain it, and I think it becomes so hard to explain the fact that you were able to. Well, I also want to give a shout out to the entire New Rochelle community, because I think it's one of the best communities out there.
Definitely, shout out New Rochelle.
That you were able to have somebody to go to and to talk to, and that person didn't give you. I think a lot of people in that position wouldn't have the strength that she did to tell you not to go. I think the easy thing for somebody to tell you is, no, you got to go, you can do it, and they try and force it on you. But she saw something. I think it's because she probably knew you for so long and knew that if you're in this shape, this isn't for you.
Right. And just to respond to what you said about, being forced to do something and something that you don't want to do, I think the Army is the prime example of that, because it's just compared to everything else. If you're in, anything else, you can leave. Let's say you join a school you don't like, or you join a program, and it's not for you. You could leave those things, and it's not. You have the choice. We're allowed to do what we want. But the Army is it's the Army. So you commit to it, and then you're really stuck. Which is, I think, was a big part of that anxiety for me, was feeling like it's not the same as being in a school that you could just drop out of, or anything like that, you're stuck. So I think that's a big part of the anxiety there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about having options. I mean, to look back to, when we were in high school together, one of the big things we'd always have was when we were pulling shenanigans or random things, we would always be scheming like options. If this happens, we can do that. If something happens, I think we're very similar in that way. I think it's why one of the reasons why we clicked and we were able to cause a little bit of too much trouble in certain areas, but we were always able to scheme about those options. But the Army there is no options. This is the most your way, my way, and there is no highway because there's only my way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, for me now, if I ever get anxious about something, I think about that feeling that I would have sitting in my bed in Rashid on a Saturday night before having to go back on Sunday morning. And I'll just think about that and think, hey, I'm in such a better place than that. At the end of the day, I'm coming home to my own bed every day. I have the choice to do what I want to do and to not do what I don't want to do. And, it's really calming for me to know that, nothing will be not to say that, it was the worst thing in the world, but, that aspect of it was really overwhelming for me. And, now being able to look back and like think about how that made me feel anxiety wise, it's nothing really compares.
So we're at the point, right? You're not getting on the plane. You're finding a way to legally get out of the Army, but you're still stuck in America. Most of your friends are in Israel. The other ones are in college, and you're just doing what? What's the plan?
Right. So the plan was to, I had to be seeing this like a psychiatrist who, actually lived down the block from me, a Jewish guy. We go to the same shul. So that worked out. And he basically had to write a letter to the Army saying that I wasn't, mentally fit to be there. And, I was diagnosed with depression and I was put on antidepressants, which is never something I thought, I would be doing. And, so for those couple months, it was really just a couple months that I was there. And then actually it's like ironic, but my family, as you know, because we spent a couple of Pesachs at the same hotel, my family always goes away somewhere because my grandfather's a rabbi and he gets invited. That year, my grandfather took a job at a hotel in Israel because I was in the Army. And because when you're in the Army, you don't know if you're going to be able to get out for Pesach until like right before. So my family wanted to come to Israel and we also have a lot of family in Israel, so that was nice. But because I was there, and then it was ironic because then it almost ended up happening that my whole family went to Israel for Pesach, and I was going to be stuck in America because I wasn't going to be allowed back in. But in the end, I was, we basically, the whole general, theme of this is we got in touch with this guy who was a higher up in the Army who like helps people out in situations like this. So he was the one who, ultimately was able to get me out, and he's the one who was able to get me back into the country. And so I came back for Pesach, and I was there for Pesach, and like the Army didn't even know I was back in Israel, and spent Pesach with my family, which was great. And then after Pesach, kind of went back to my base, and for like a couple months it was like a long process. Getting out of the Army is not an easy thing to do, and it takes a long, long time. And you have to meet with a bajillion people in a bajillion different parts of Israel. But that was what I did. And I, met with everyone who I had to meet with and filled out all the paperwork I had to do. And it took a while, but eventually I got out officially and legally and was able to spend the last couple months, at least, of the year when most people had already left. But, I was able to spend the last couple months of the year in yeshiva, which was like an amazing experience for me. And it was so great that I at least had that and got to like at least end the year feeling like, okay, I was where I wanted to be. Yeah, that's kind of how the year played out. It was a long year.
And you mentioned in the beginning, right? You're back in New Rochelle, and you have to see a psychiatrist, and he's putting you on I think you mentioned depression. You did mention depression. Were you
It's
depressed?
a great question. And honestly, I don't think that I was. Yeah, I don't think that I was. I think that I was miserable in the Army. I don't know why he prescribed that to me. Um, you know what? I'm actually trying to remember. I might have misspoke. I apologize. I saw the same therapist. I saw the same therapist a few years later, and then is when he prescribed me antidepressants. I apologize. At that
No.
point in my life,
Hey,
he did not.
it's okay. It's okay. We're gonna get to the next stage because obviously there are repercussions emotionally just for going through a traumatic experience like
Yeah.
this. And a big part of depression is there's a big debate, right? A lot of people are sad and they think they're depressed, but they're similar but different in a lot of
Right.
ways. So you don't believe you were depressed during this time. You were just miserable. Had to whatever I got to do to get out of this situation. I got to do survival mode.
Right. Yeah. That is pretty much sums it up. I was sad, but I think I had to act sadder. You know what I mean?
Of course, you got. I mean, you're from just looking at it from the outside, and actually not even only from the outside because we were speaking, and I knew how miserable you were. This was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this from you, so that's how I knew. I was like, this isn't Noam being. This isn't a joke. This is real. These are real things that are happening to him. He's really in a rough shape, and for a lot of us being back in Israel, it was just for a lot of us we were very worried, and we just wanted you just to be safe and to be okay. And there was never and you should know from us, there was never any judgment. Noam's running away from the army or Noam's quitting the army. It was Noam's our friend. We love Noam. We want him to be okay. And looking back now, I mean, I'm really happy that you were able to do it. And I also want to give a lot of credit to you. I don't know what it is, but only you could leave the army without permission, then not go back, then somehow find a way to be allowed to re-enter the country for Passover. I don't know how you do it,
Baruch
but I don't think
Hashem.
anybody else.
Hashem made things work out for me that year. Thank God.
That's an incredible feat. And now now you're out of the army. What's the plan? You're back, and after you come back from Israel for the second year, you're going to college?
Right. So I'm going to college. I actually just want to touch on another thing.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say two other things. Number one, just
Yeah.
in response to what you said about, and I'm going to tie this back because I was just thinking about that. I wanted to say this at the very, very beginning, and I didn't get to, and it's connected. When you said that, you guys didn't judge me at all for those decisions, and I'm your friend, and you just want me to be okay and support me, and of course that's the case. For me, just realize, with everything I said at the beginning in terms of my need to impress people, and that my leaving the army definitely, when I'm leaving, it was this big debate inside. Should I? On the one hand, I knew that I really wanted to get out, but on the other hand, it's like, what are people going to think of this? This is really lame. This is like the lamest thing to do, to leave the army after you committed to do it. Like, what are people going to think about me? But like you said, really, your friends don't care. They don't think of it like that. And I remember, and I want to get this in there because it was such a crucial thing for me. I remember later in my life, later on, and I'm fasting forward a little bit. I remember having a conversation with, and I'm not fasting forward in a bad way because this is not relevant to anything else in the future. But I remember having a conversation with, a therapist, and telling him about these feelings that I have of always thinking about what other people think of me, and always worrying. And I remember I was even telling him in the context of my house, the basketball court in my house, how it's right next to the busy street where everyone's driving by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So I would play basketball a lot, and in my mind, just the way that I think, a lot of the time. So I'll be playing basketball, and in my mind, I'm thinking that every single person driving by is watching me and thinking about, how I look while I'm playing and how my shot looks and all this stuff, which is obviously ridiculous and obviously not true. But unfortunately,
But it's
that's how my
real.
mind works sometimes. And I remember telling my therapist this, and I remember he just looked at me and he goes, "Wow, you really think people give a," and he cursed. And it was just, it sounds funny, but it was like, for me, it was so big because he was really, he was like trying to prove a point to me, which he did, which is like, people don't care. People aren't looking at you like that. People, aren't thinking about you like that. And for me now, a lot of the times, what I have to do when and I think, I've gotten a lot better and I don't get anxious about that kind of stuff as much anymore. But, if I ever do, what I have to do is just realize, what would I think about someone else? For example, right? You are one of my closest friends in the whole world, right? And I obviously like you very much and have a tremendous amount of respect for you. For you, like, you would have to do something so insane for me to like change my view of you, right? There's practically nothing you could do or say to me that would make me think any less of you. So sometimes, that's what I have to tell myself in terms of things like that, like leaving the army, like, oh, my friends might have, thought that I was lame or whatever. But no, if I had a friend who was doing that, how would I feel? Obviously, I know who they are as a person, and I know, that I like them, and I'm not judging them. We're not judging each other. So that's something that I just wanted to say because you said that about how you guys felt when I left the army.
Oh, absolutely. I think I want to also shed some spotlight to those feelings. Right when you talk about it out loud, right? Shooting basketball, you're like thinking everyone thinks about you, and you can see like from when you're outside of it how silly it sounds. But when you're in that moment, I think it's a very common feeling. I know I felt it. I've spoken to people who felt it as well. It's real. You really do feel like the world is talking about you,
Yeah.
and the world cares about you. And I remember it must have been a couple of weeks ago. I was having a conversation with one of our good friends, Devere, and we were talking about this, and he sent me a really incredible quote by Winston Churchill, and it goes, "When you're 20, you care what everybody thinks. When you're 40, you stop caring what everyone thinks, and then when you're 60, you realize no one was ever thinking about you in the
Yeah.
first place." And it doesn't mean that nobody's thinking about you, because obviously your close family and your close friends, we're all thinking about you. But the average person and the random guy that's going down your street is thinking about
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
They're
I've
not. They're
definitely
not.
seen that quote, and it's like nice that you share that quote. But it happens to be that my dad was like a huge Winston Churchill fan and would share his quotes like all the time, and like he would put his quotes on my like fourth grade Tanakh bookmark. Like he was a big Winston Churchill guy. But yeah, and I think you shed light on an important point that there's really two. There's, in terms of that anxiety or whatever you want to call it, of worrying about what other people think of you. There's two sides of it. There's worrying about what your friends and family think of you, and there's worrying about what strangers think of you when you're walking down the street. So I think, like I said before, when it comes to family and friends, it's important to know that they love you and they know who you are as a person, and they're not judging you for anything short of like a major wild change in character. They love you and they care about you and they know who you are, and they don't want to see you change, and they just want to see you happy and healthy. And then, like you said, when it comes to a stranger, they don't care. They're not looking at you. They're not thinking about you. They're doing their own thing. So it's just like, and again, like you said, it's something that sounds silly because I'm sure there are people who don't struggle with that and who don't think like that. But I also know, like you said, there are a lot of people who do, myself included, and you sometimes also. And, it's important to remember. It's like, it sounds childish, but it's important to remember.
Absolutely. And so now we're getting to the point. We're getting to college. You've just come off of two real traumatic experiences in the last 5-6 years. Your father passed away when you were 15. You just had a real mental event happen with the army, and now you're going off to college. I mean, what happens next?
Right. So you just reminded me of the other thing that I wanted to say before. A conversation that I had before I got out of the army. A conversation that I had before I got out of the army that would, ultimately shed light on a lot of what my life looked like in the years following. I remember being at home before I went back to Israel, while I was still in that, kind of hiatus period from the army. And I remember calling and speaking to one of our rabbis, who you also know, who's an incredibly smart person. And I remember just talking to him and telling him the situation and telling him everything I was feeling and that I wanted to get out. And he told me, and this is probably the most accurate thing that anybody's ever said to me, in terms of a prediction. He said to me, he's like, just know that if you leave the army right now, you are going to have a really hard time sticking things out in the future. And I was obviously couldn't see into the future, so I didn't know how true that would be, but he's an extremely smart person, and he was right on the money with that one. As you know, after I left the army, then, I come back to America, and once you leave something like that and they know that's the danger. That's the danger. And I don't regret anything, because ultimately in the end, like I said, that, my wanting to get out of the army really ultimately came down to wanting to build a stronger religious foundation while I still had the chance, which I was able to do. So I have absolutely zero regrets in terms of leaving the army, but it did create, a mindset, whether conscious or subconscious, of, being able to run away from things when they get hard, and, that out is there, that you don't have to stick things out, and that, if something gets hard or you don't like it anymore, or it's not comfortable enough for you, that you can just leave, which, is not how life works. And, you can't always have that mindset, which I had now, unfortunately, at that point in my life developed. So I go to YU, and, me and you were in YU together. We're both going through our stuff, and, it got hard, and I've never been a strong student. And my first semester in YU was great. Like, I was doing a ton of learning, and I was only in 2 classes, and like only for like an hour each day. And other than that, I was just learning all day, and I was in a great place religiously, and I was loving it. And then my second semester, I was having a harder time learning, and I was in more classes, and it starts to get hard. And so that part of my mind kind of kicks in. It's like, oh, the last time you were doing something that you didn't like, you just left. So you should just leave. So that's what I did. I kind of gave up on it and wanted to be comfortable sitting in my room and not doing all the things I was supposed to be doing. And I, basically dropped out of the semester. And that, was one rung on the ladder of, me not following through on things after the army.
You actually made it 6 more months longer than I did. I mean, I know what it's like, man, going through those things. I was going through a really tough time in my life, and I mean, I guess I did the post-Passover program, freaked out there. Then I was like, went over the summer, I was like, oh, it won't happen again. First day, anxiety through the roof, mentally in shambles. I made it through. I think I officially took my leave of absence in maybe the first week of November. So I made it like 2 months. And I'll never forget to this day. Memories are pretty shady, but to this day, how hard the transition is. And I don't think people understand mentally how hard it can get. And then we're kind of not taught. I don't think we've been taught in schooling and through other things how to actually handle that adversity and those emotions. So then we're left with nothing. It's kind of like you build an emotional house of cards, and then they kind of just topple. And I remember going through myself, and then I remember seeing you. You were thriving. You were my friend, and I remember talking with you, and you were always giving me words of encouragement, being like, "Yo, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it." And then it turned out I couldn't do it, and then you went through it like not only 3 months later.
Right. I mean, well, you and I both know that you just made me sound a lot nicer than I really was. I was a little bit harsh on you, as I'm sure you remember. And I remember because, in terms of both of, obviously what we went through was different, but the timeline was similar. And you were basically like a few months ahead of me, so to speak. And so I remember at this time, and when I was like on such a high in my life, and I was doing so well, and you were like struggling with so many things. And I remember you like wanted to talk to me, and I remember not understanding it. And I remember not understanding what was so hard for you. And I remember being a little bit harsh, and I'm sure I was, sensitive in some ways, but I remember, talking to you and, not really understanding, why you weren't doing the things you, quote unquote should be doing. And, I didn't understand. And then, and then I went through the same things like 3 months later, like biggest karma of all time.
Well, I wouldn't say it's
No, not
karma,
karma, but
but what it was. No, I think I also, yeah, I think you applied a lot of tough love, but I don't think it was out of a place of. I know there wasn't out of a place of any malice. And I also think there's the thing about tough love is, people only talk about it when it works.
right.
But what happens when you give somebody tough love and it doesn't work? Was it necessarily the wrong approach? I don't know. What if you did give me the tough love and that's what it needed to succeed? It turns out it wasn't, but it doesn't mean it was necessarily the wrong approach. Hindsight's 2020.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and,
So,
and having gone through a similar thing, and I can say for sure that tough love never would have worked for me. So I can say, looking back, that I can understand 100% why it wouldn't have worked for you either. But at the time, I guess in my mind, it was what you needed to hear. And I tried, and, I appreciate your openness to, the understanding that nobody knows what's going to work and what's not. And tough love is an approach, and it's love nonetheless. And, I thought that that's what you needed, and I was wrong, and that's not the worst thing in the world.
absolutely not. So we're sorry it's going slowly, but so now we're what, at the middle of the second semester, so we're in like April, February, March.
Yeah, I mean, the second semester, I kind of like, just kind of stopped doing it. I was like spending more and more time just in my room playing video games. Like, didn't want to go to anything, got way too comfortable. And then, because it starts off as a big picture thing, right? It starts off as a big picture, like, oh, I don't like YU anymore. This whole thing is scary. I'd so much rather, do something I want to do. And then it breaks its way down into your day to day, where it's like, oh, I'm sitting in class and I don't like it in class. And then that mindset kicks in again of, oh, if you don't like something, you're able to leave. This isn't the army. You're not trapped here. It's your choice. You can leave class. You can go back to your room and play video games if you want to. And, then you just get more and more comfortable making that decision on a day-to-day basis. And then just got to the point where I was making that bad decision every single day, to the point that I was just behind on my classes and I wasn't doing anything. And I had to leave. I had to stop. And I told myself, that YU wasn't for me anymore, and that I was going to go to yeshiva and Shar Yashuv, which, that was like what I told myself, to be able to feel like leaving YU was my decision, and not, me letting myself fail out for a lack of trying or lack of willing to put myself in under any sort of intellectual strain whatsoever. But yeah, that's just kind of what happened. I just let myself kind of slowly trickle out.
Was there a part of you that, I guess, I don't know, what was there, like an emotional feeling that started to happen that second semester that started to kick in? Was it like, oh no, this is happening again?
It was a combination of a couple things. It was, in the first semester, like I said, I was doing a lot of learning. I was really learning one thing and one thing only. I was learning, a masechta. I was learning towards something to make a siyum for my dad's yard site. So I was basically, I was learning one thing, and I had a goal in mind, and I needed to do it by a certain time. And so I was doing that all day, every day, and I was so committed to it, and I was loving it. And then, then I finished that, and then it was kind of like, well, now what? And I'm the type of person that I sometimes need like a little bit of more than, I'm not always the best at doing things out of my own motivation, or I should say I wasn't always the best. Now I think I'm a lot better at it, but at the time it wasn't. So I was able to do all that learning because I had a purpose and I had a goal in mind, and it was for something. But then after that, it wasn't as simple as just, okay, now start learning something else. Because it's like, oh, learning what and for what and over what long period of time, and how long is it going to take me, and how much am I going to do every day? For what I was doing before, it was very set out and scheduled, and I knew how much I had to do every day. It was a lot. It's basically all of my day, every single day. So then that ended, and then it was kind of like, now what in terms of learning? So that was phase one. And then, it was kind of a domino effect of, okay, wasn't learning as much, and then started not going to shear as much, and then started struggling with minion, which I had been like so good about and never would have thought that it was something I would have stopped doing. But that's the danger of letting yourself kind of fall into that pattern of not doing things that you should be doing. You can stop doing things that you never would have thought you would have stopped doing, and then stopped going to classes. And stopped going to classes was probably earlier on that list, but you get the picture. I was just got into this mindset of not wanting to do things that I didn't want to do, and would every single day would so much rather sit in my room comfortably and play video games and not have to think about that stuff that was making me anxious, and not have to worry about school, which I'm really bad at, or the learning, which I'm not doing. I can just ignore all that and play video games and do whatever other distractions a person can do.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. That's anxiety. That's right. You went from having a ton of certainty and you had a structured schedule to now one thing stops and now everything kind of becomes uncertain. And when you're uncertain about things, it becomes the unknown. And when you don't know something, that's a lot of anxiety is based in the fear of the unknown. It's not knowing what's going to happen. And
right.
It seems like you ended up having a lot of uncertainty, and then that anxiety, I like to can really take form of like a ball rolling down a hill where it just picks up more momentum and it goes faster and faster, and sometimes it becomes an unstoppable force, and it feels like I can't stop it. So what am I supposed to do? And you just kind of decide, hey, I need to shut down. I remember when you were going through this, and I was just, at that point, for the most part of that, I was, at points that at my own rock bottom where I couldn't really get out of bed most days. And if I could get out of bed, I couldn't even get out of the house. And you start locking yourself in your room. And when you're locked in your room, you can't actually help yourself get any better. You're not getting any sunlight. You're not getting any conversations. You don't even want to talk to anyone. And he basically stops you from being able to even help yourself.
Right. And I think that's a really important point. And I think that it kind of segues into a really important conversation that I'm in no way an expert on. And, the last thing I would want is to sound insensitive towards anyone going through anything. I do, but I think that you shed light on something that's important, which is that, a lot of times we go through these things, right? And, they're hard, and, we have a void, whatever it is, for whatever, everybody has their baggage, so everybody has things that they, are dragging them down a little bit or making life hard, whatever it is. And those things are real and they're hard. And then when we go through those things, they create some kind of void that a lot of times we distract ourselves from, and we, spend time doing other things and shutting down emotionally or whatever it is. But I think that the important thing to realize in terms of that is that a lot of times we make it so much worse. We dig the hole much deeper by doing all that and using all those vices and shutting down and ignoring it. And I think that it's so important for people to realize that, yes, you're going through something, and yes, it's hard and it's real and it's a real struggle and it takes time and it takes work. But I think that sometimes people might make the mistake, myself included, of attributing it all to that thing, as opposed to realizing our own hand in it and our own hand in making it worse as opposed to making it better.
I think it's such an important part. I think because mental health is internal, right? There's it obviously manifests an external physical thing. It can, for sure, but it's pain, and there's real pain and there's real suffering that goes on when you end up in those scenarios where it's such a tricky devil in the way where it stops you from doing the small things, right? That voice inside your head that says you're not good enough, or you can't do it, or really anything, as much as like, oh, it's okay if you don't write for you. It's like, oh, if you don't go to this, it's okay. And your mind starts to trick yourself into doing that. And you're not actually capable of helping you. I shouldn't say you're not capable. It makes it really hard to help yourself. And at the end of the day, your friends and your support systems are so valuable and so important. But I truly believe this. At the end of the day, it's all about getting the individuals to a place where they can take that first step in helping themselves. For somebody who's depressed, it's about getting out of bed. It's about finding the power and the will to get out of the bed, get out of bed. Now, once you're out of the bed, you have options. Once I'm out of the bed and I'm depressed, I can actually do something that can help me break out of my depression. I can go outside. And if I can go outside and it's sunny out, I can get some real pure vitamin D, or I can see somebody. I can pick up a phone. I can go for a walk. I can make a phone call with somebody. I can talk to somebody else and get out of their own head. You have options. And when you have that beauty about options is it gives you power and it gives you some control back in your life. Because the mental health and the anxiety, and it's such a powerful plays such a powerful role in convincing you don't have any control and you have no power. You a lot of times, and I know maybe you can test this, I know I felt completely powerless. I felt like I couldn't control anything because I felt everything that happened was my fault, and I was already making these decisions, and it led me to this point.
Right. I think you just brought up a bunch of great points. First of all, like you said, a lot of times the thing that's hard for us ends up dragging us down even more and ends up, making us feel like we can't do anything about it, which is really hard and makes it worse. And I also think, one of the most important things you said, just in terms of the individual, and that, and you and I were actually talking about this the other day, just like a person could have as many friends and as many families and as big of a support system as possible, and which is great and important and a lot of times crucial. But at the end of the day, if a person isn't willing, a person needs to know what the problem is for themselves. It's not going to get better just by people talking to them. If the person's not, A, willing to realize that there's something wrong here, and B, willing to accept the fact that they need to make a change. And it can be a small change. It can be really, really small things that need to happen. I can say for myself, I still have a ton of growth to do in every area, but I also, I can look at my life, a few years ago when I was, at a pretty low point and think about it, it wasn't one big leap, not even close to one big leap. It was really baby steps. And I could say, where I was, last year is significantly different than where I am right now. And where I was a year before that is also super different. And it's steps, and it's about making steps and knowing that you have to change. And I was actually thinking about this in terms of you, because I actually think that you are like one of the best people at that and having that mentality. I was thinking about this today. It's funny. I remember when we were in high school, and I'm sure you remember this too, summer of, I want to say 10th grade, but I don't remember for sure.
It was in between sophomore and junior year.
Yeah, you already know what I'm going to say?
I have an idea.
Yeah, and do you mind if I say?
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
And so David would, both of us had nothing going on that summer. And, when people would ask David what he was doing that summer, he would say, I'm working on myself. And I remember I remember we were like best friends. And so some people would say to me, oh, what is Izzo doing this summer? And I would say, oh, he's working on himself. And I remember at the time, I was like a 16-year-old kid. That probably sounded really dumb to me. And I probably laughed about it a couple of times. And I remember, and I'll never forget, I didn't see you like most of the summer. And I remember seeing you at the end of the summer. And, it's so long ago that I don't remember exactly what the details were of it. But I remember being like, whoa, this kid really changed. Like, you like really did work on yourself. And I didn't get it. I didn't get how you did that, or like what exactly you did over the summer that made that happen. But you were like this not new person. You were still yourself, but you had worked on so many things about yourself that you wanted to. And it was like so inspiring. And I think that ever since then, I've seen that in you, that you're this person that like, when you when there's something wrong, and when there's something that you want to work on for yourself, and you do it. And sometimes, obviously you've had ups and downs like all of us, and sometimes it's not instantaneous, but you're that type of person that, you see that something, you want to work on something, and you really do it, and you really accept that there's work that needs to be done. And I think that that's, one of your strongest qualities for sure.
It's kind of funny looking back now because it's true. Like, I really did say I wanted to work myself, and I did put in a lot of work that summer. But it was also it was like that summer was like one of the hardest summers of my life. I was coming. That was I was so must. I think I remember when I came to your house. I remember I came to your house for Shabbat that weekend, and I was probably in month like 5 or 6 where I wasn't talking to my parents at
Right.
all. I had no contact with them at all. I was those 6 months, and was a buildup of a few years where I was so angry all of the time, where it got to the point where I emotionally broke and said I can't do this anymore, and I just decided I broke in a lot of ways, and I spent like a few months just being so angry, being so reckless. And I did a lot of thinking that summer because I was supposed to go on a program. A lot of people go on a program and they travel the world. A lot of people go to Israel. I was supposed to go on a trip, and I wasn't allowed to go because I was given an ultimatum of you either speak or you don't
Right.
go.
I remember.
I'm so stubborn and so strong-willed and a dumbass that I decided my pride was all I could have said was like 3 words, pretended that everything was okay, and I would have had a summer spent traveling Europe and in Israel, and I probably would have had a great time. But I spent the summer, and I think, I don't know if it was consciously or really the work done underneath, I think I kind of realized, like, this isn't regardless of my relationship with my parents, regardless, you can't be this angry. It's going to hurt me in the long run. It's going to destroy relationships with people. And I decided that I put in a lot of work that summer, and how much work can a 16-year-old do? I do appreciate it. And I think it's a trait I've worked on, and maybe it did start there. But just thinking back, it just makes me laugh. What 16-year-old kid says I'm working on myself on the summer?
No, I mean, yeah,
Like,
100%. And like I said,
what? If somebody said it to me, oh my god, I would have destroyed them verbally. Oh my god, I would have had to feel
right.
that.
Like, again, like I said, I'm not going to say I didn't laugh at you behind your back.
You should have. I would have laughed at you.
Yeah. But then I saw you in person, and I saw it, and I remember I was like, whoa, this is real. This really happened.
I was lucky, man. That last 6 months of run we had that sophomore year is one of the greatest runs any duo has ever had. I mean, we were both emotionally reeling. I mean, it's not a comparison. Like, you just lost your dad. I had cut off all relationships with my parents, and we basically created our own family. We kind of created our Gemara and Tanakh class combined as one. And we basically said,
10.28
it's that 10.28 shout out. It's that meme from, I've never seen the movie Captain Phillips, but it's a great meme where guy takes over the ship and he goes, I'm the captain now.
Right.
We basically did that to our classes, and we kind of ran in and we centered it around. I mean, looking back now, we 100% started a cult. We appealed to our emotions were appealed to. We decided to appeal to everyone's emotions and said we're either with us or against us. And we kind of created our own family. And I think for both of us, that was a way for us to deal with emotional voids going on. It's like, well, if something's missing, I need to fill it. We need to fill it somehow. It was a lot of fun, but I think there's a lot. It's probably like a therapist would probably go have a field day with that.
Oh, yeah.
But we're not. This isn't that. This podcast is a lot of things, and in a way can be therapy, but that's not what we're doing here. So, there's a lot that we've spoken about. I want to now switch to, there's some, obviously, so if there's more parts you want to bring us up to, present day, what happened, you leaving college till now, what went on?
Right. So a lot went on, or I should say not a lot went on. I like I said, I left YU and I told myself I was going to go to this yeshiva, and that was really what I needed, but I was just not in a good place. I was not in a good place emotionally anymore, and, mentally, and I was, just looking for the easy way out all the time. So, I started this yeshiva, and I didn't like it either. And I basically was out the door from day one. It was like this theme had developed so strongly for me of leaving things I didn't like that I wasn't even really giving things a chance anymore, without, because like I said before, it gets to a place where it's like, you just want to be in your own comfortable little bubble, and doing whatever you need to do to distract yourself. And, because if you know that you can go be comfortable and you're so used to making that decision, why would you choose to do something productive and meaningful when you can just go and, distract yourself? And, so like, I just got so used to making that decision for myself that I wasn't even giving it a chance. So, that whole yeshiva thing didn't really work out. It also happened to be that it wasn't really for me. And I did learn a lot there about myself religiously, but that's a whole different conversation. And then I was just living at home, and I had no motivation to do anything. I had no plan, I had no sense of what I wanted to do, or, what I just wanted to do my own thing. I didn't want to commit to anything. I didn't want to, have that anxiety of, being committed to something and having to do something that I didn't like, or that wasn't easy for me, or, wasn't comfortable enough for me, So I stayed at home where I'm comfortable and, could do my own thing and distract myself and, not have to worry about the world, which, you can't do, how old was I then? Probably like 22. You can't do that. So, so that was going on for a few months. Probably more than a few months. It was going on for a long time, a big chunk of the year. And finally, like we discussed before, you could have as many friends. I had a lot of friends there. I had my family trying to help me. I had, friends trying to reach out and trying to get me to do things. But at the end of the day, a person needs to make a decision for himself, for his or herself. So, at the end of the day, I knew, I always knew, this is what I want to be doing. I want to, be more productive. I want to do something, I don't want this to be my life. That much I knew, so at least I was like I had that one good step for me, but you got to do something about it. So I pushed that off for a while. And then finally, we went away for Pesach, and I was able to kind of use that as a time to recalibrate in a sense. And I was lucky enough to get a part-time job right after Pesach. So I was able to take that and go straight into, this, a more productive environment. And it happens to be that it worked out really, really well. Thank God. The place that I got a job was the school where I went to my whole life at SAR. So I got a job there, and I think that really attributed to my ability to stick it out, because it was this place that I was comfortable already and knew everybody. If I had gone from that whole, that whole zone of, not being able to commit to things is where I'm not comfortable and all this stuff, if I had gone and got a job at, any other school that I didn't know or never had been to before, I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know if I would have, dropped out of that and, given up on it. But I think the fact that I got a job at SAR, Baruch Hashem, it was really huge for me to be able to be in an environment where I was comfortable and, knew people and, just felt safe because I had been there my whole childhood. So that was a huge part of it for me. And, thank God from then on, things have been good, constant, obviously I shouldn't say constant growth, there's always ups and downs, but overall, a lot of, positive steps, year by year. I've made a lot of strides in terms of, my emotional well-being and, productivity and the different things that I've dealt with. And Baruch Hashem, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that a huge part of it is, because Hashem and God just has absolutely showered me with bracha that I did not deserve, and helped me in ways that I in no way merited, but he did, and thank God I've come a long way. But I'm sure you're going to want to go back and talk about those times. Those were hard times. Those were tough times after college.
Well, I think it's really interesting because you mentioned before that Passover, you finally started to say, "Hey, I need to make a change." And I know you personally, you actually started to make a change. And it's interesting that right after Passover, things started to come up your way. And sometimes it can listen. God is great, Hashem. I'm a believer, and sometimes I think it can get really hard when you have to decide, right? I'm doing the work and thanking God, but it kind of works in your own way. But I think credit where credit's due. You took the first step to allow yourself for when the opportunity, if you want to say God put it in your way, or when the opportunity presented itself to work to go back, you were in a place where you could actually do it, and not only do it, but succeed at it. And when you succeed at something, you start to feel good. And when you go from a place where you're bad to a place where you start to get some momentum, some good going back. I mean, I know. And this is one of my favorite, I think it's maybe the best thing I've ever heard, was when we were in our first year in Israel. One of the rabbis who gives a speech every Thursday, talked about how life is like an EKG machine where you have a healthy heart rate, right? It goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes down. And that's, to me, is so absolutely true. And when you're talking about your story, I mean, you can literally, if you just put it on that graph, you can see where the ups go and the downs go. But what you don't see is the work that goes in before those ups come.
Right. And I think, I appreciate it. And definitely, it's easier to take steps when you have something to do. So, that you're right. And I made initial steps to, be the kind of person who could be working there and, be okay to be there every day, but that job really was, I did no work to get that job. Like literally someone approached me and asked me if I would do it. And, it just all worked out really, really well. But, I think that, like you said, and I also, this connects to something that you said earlier in terms of depression and just like getting out of bed in the morning and then you have options in terms of what to do. I think that, and this is something I really wanted to say in our conversation, people naturally, want to be productive and want to live meaningful, productive lives. That's what our minds want. Our minds want to be stimulated throughout the day. Our minds don't want to just, sit and be numbed from Netflix or, alcohol, whatever it is. We people want to be productive and do things, and again, that's obviously not to say that there can't be downtime. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But, like you said, just the first, I remember I once saw this speech. I don't know if you ever saw this. It was this army general or something like that. And he gave, the speech at a certain college graduation. And his speech was basically about making your bed in the morning. And his whole thing was, every day when you wake up, get out of bed and make your bed. Because, and his lesson was, if you start off your day by making your bed, you have now begun your day with an act of productivity. You've now done something and you can feel good about that. And don't tell yourself, oh, making your bed, that's just small, that's stupid. Especially if you're someone who struggles with something like this, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. You get out of bed, you make your bed in the morning, and you feel like you've done something. And I'm telling you, our minds, we want to be productive. We want to do things. And if we do one thing, like you said, one thing leads to another thing, and you'll want to keep going. One of the things that I've throughout the years, one of my biggest struggles, even until recently, has been, using my time productively. I've gotten better at a lot of things, but that's one of the things, is whenever I have free time, like I don't use it in the best way. I until very recently, it was always the default of like, oh, what's on Netflix or YouTube or whatever it is? What can I watch to distract myself or just to be bored and not have to think about anything? But something I've been doing for myself in the last few months, and it's been huge for me. It's like really showed me how much I want to be productive in my day to day, is I've been making to-do lists. I make a to-do list on my phone. And like, if you have an iPhone, you can make a to-do list in your notes and you can make it, checkable, like a checkable list. And I make a list and you can put small things on that list, really, like walk to UPS and drop off this return, or, fill out this form, send this email, whatever it is. It can be small things on that list. And some days you'll have more than others, but, you make a list and then you do the things and you start checking things off that list. And for me, at least, and I'm sure this would be the case for other people too, you start checking things off that list and you start to feel good. And you start to feel that sense of productivity and of, like doing things. And, you want to check off more things on your list and you want to get it done. And, it just helps to take that first step and to, make yourself feel productive and like you want to be doing something more.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. I've said this a couple times in the podcast. I think one of the best things you can do if you're in a rut is just find the smallest thing. If you're somebody who doesn't make your bed in the morning, you wake up, first thing you do, make your bed. You're now 10 seconds into your day. You've already accomplished something. You have a messy room. I have a pretty messy room. Clean my room. I've made my bed and I've cleaned my room. I'm 2 minutes into the day. Already accomplished two things. Now I'm going into the rest of my day on a winning streak. I've already done two things. I go do something small. You basically can start your day with some positive momentum in life, and momentum is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
You get going, you ride that wave, and listen. There are times, and this is a big part of mental health and anxiety. That voice inside your head tries to belittle it. When you just made your bed, and you think you're cool now. It's like you think you really done anything. It's like sometimes you have to play that game with you. Sometimes your brain, you can go like, yeah, you're right. It's not such a big thing, but it's a small thing that contributes to the larger point.
Yeah.
A lot of that is, I mean, I think that's incredible. That speech, I agree with it wholeheartedly. We're at a point now in the conversation where I have a few last questions I want to ask. And I think there's a lot of things we can talk about. I hope you'll come back on because there's a lot I want to dive more into.
It'll be my honor.
At the time. One question I have is, what was it like with your family, with your mom, your brother, and your sister when all this was going on? Right, you have so much turmoil. How did that impact your relationships?
In terms of, you're talking about after, like when I was living at home?
Yeah, after the army. Well, let's take from after the army, you get home until while you're going through, that those dark times where you're just at home and you're out of college and things are just going bad. What was from then to then? What was it like? How did it work? Was your family supportive? Were they okay with you? Was it hard?
Right. So, I mean, my mom is, as you know, like amazing when it comes to stuff like that. And she's like the most supportive person in the world. So, when it came to leaving the army and leaving YU, she never once gave me a hard time about it. She's always been the type of person who, trusts us to make our own decisions and, and supports us in those decisions. And she's not just like, oh, make your own decisions and, do whatever you want. She supports our decisions and she helps us follow through on them in whatever way she can. So she was always super supportive, of me leaving places and trying to start new things. When it came to then living at home, that's when it becomes tricky because, I'm like this 21, 22-year-old guy living at home, not doing anything. And, you can't really be supportive of that, like no good parent is supportive of that. So it definitely created a lot of tension between us, where, she obviously came out of a place of love from her, wanting to see me healthy and, willing to, and she was like, all she wanted to do was pay for me to see a therapist, that was what she wanted to spend. Like, it's expensive, she wanted to spend that money for me because she thought that's what I needed, when she was probably right. And eventually I did, kind of take her up on that and start doing that for a little while. But yeah, she was very supportive, always very supportive, but it definitely, and all from my own faults, created a lot of tension between us while I was living at home, and, doing nothing productive. But, in the end, then once I started being more proactive in my life and started a job and everything, she was, back to supporting me in any way that she possibly could. In terms of my siblings, I don't know, it wasn't, I'm close with my siblings, and I think when I was living at home, I was probably a little bit distant from them because, I was just always kind of doing my own thing, and I was shut down from everyone. I was not really in the interacting with other people zone. So I think I kind of probably was shut off from them a little bit. But I don't think it necessarily affected our relationship so strongly.
I want to give credit where credit's due. I think I've grown very close to your family over the years. To give some context to who they are, I think it was when I was 21, so it must have been. This was while actually I was in my big crisis. This was a couple. It must have been like 6 weeks before I ended up having to leave college to take a mental leave of absence, a mental health leave of absence. I remember I spent one of the holidays, the Jewish holidays, with you guys, and I left the night, and I was like, nobody was home. My family was in Israel for the holidays, and it was just me alone, and I was not in a good place. I was having a lot of trouble keeping food in, just on certain medications that my doctor put me on. I was throwing up a lot, and I was in a bad place, and for some reason, I just wanted to get home after spending like a really not great holiday with you and your family, who always opened. I mean, I spent so many holidays with you guys at this point. It's like, it's weird if I don't. but you guys opened up your home like so nicely. Now, for some reason, I just had to get out of there, and I just had to get out. And then I remember it was literally the next day at like 4 o'clock, and I'm having like a crazy panic attack, and I'm alone in my house, and I literally I was like, I can't be alone right now. I can't do this. And I remember I called you up, and I go, hey, I know I just left, but like, I'm not doing so well. Would you guys cool if I come stay with you guys for the rest of the holiday? And you and your mom and your siblings were like opened your home, and were so supportive with open arms. And I'm just this kid who's mentally in shambles, and I'm running to the bathroom 3 times a day just to throw up, and it's not even like it's like weird at this point. It's just like I know it's coming, and I'm having panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and you guys are so open and so cool and so accepting that to this day I'll never forget it. And for your mom, who's like been like a second mother to me, like always happy to talk. Like I think it's so awesome that you had that support system, and your siblings like accepted me as if like I was part of the family. It's like, oh, Izzo's coming for Sabbath or coming for a holiday. Like awesome. Like opening, your brother's always giving me his room if I needed it. Just shared his room with me. Like you guys are like such a special family, and a bigger shout out to even to your community. Like you guys I know your family and your family friends have been like so supportive. Like I think it's really awesome that you've had that support system, and I'm really happy that you were able to. I mean, I'm just lucky to have been able to be a part of it. So I really want to emphasize how crucial a role you and your family and your community has played in my life in dealing with my own issues.
Oh, wow. I mean, Buskies love Izzo, so like it's a simple equation. So we're always happy to have Izzo over. It's always a good time. Was that Sukkot what you were just talking about?
That was Sukkot.
Right.
Yeah. We'd be in Minyan, and I remember must have been like the second day or third day this already happened, and I remember I gave you a look. You looked at me, and I like was about to be sick. I was like, oh, I'd already known. I'm like, I gotta go run to the bathroom. Like I'm gonna puke. You give me a look, and you're like, what is going on?
I remember not knowing what the heck was going on, and I remember being like super confused and having no clue what was going on with you, but just like wanting to at least make you feel like comfortable and like you had a place to stay.
Yeah, you guys did an incredible job. It's like, here's this kid, he's just puking his brains out every 3 times a day, like randomly, like just like out of nowhere, and you guys just like, cool, you're safe. Like you guys always made me feel comfortable.
Yeah, here's some water in the towel.
Yeah, basically. So I want to wrap off because we're almost at the crazy. It feels like it's been so quickly. We're almost at the 2-hour mark, and we end off this podcast. Every guest we do the segment where each of us are going to talk about one thing that we are currently worried about, and then one thing that we used to worry about and how we overcame it. Since I invited you on, I'm gonna actually I'll give you some time to think about it, but I'll go first. One thing that I'm currently worried about. My family actually just put our house up on the market, and we're moving, and I've been home for a lot of this pandemic, just help. And recently we've been packing up. I've been going through my room, packing up the house, and I'm not worried about like selling out. Like, awesome. I think it's like, let's move on. I'm actually worried that it's not affecting me. Like, I'm like very worried, like, right. This is going to be something that's going to come back to bite me. If like, I'm trying to be very conscious of it, like emotionally dealing with it in its own time, so it doesn't come back to bite me. And one thing that I was worried about, and I'm no longer worried about, I was really worried. Should have been my worry of the week on last week's podcast. I had to give a speech for a friend of mine, a really close friend of mine who he's getting married, and he made a siyum so we could meet during these 9 days, and we ended up being so rough, and I had to give a speech, and I was like really worried about nailing it. I've only had to do it one other time, and I kind of didn't do it as well as actually yours. And if I could take it back, I would. I don't think it was in the right headspace.
No, it was great. It was great.
Right. But I actually ended up nailing it, crushed that speech. So I'm not worried about that. And I think there's a lot that played into it why I was able to do it. So I'm not worried, I guess, about public speaking anymore in that sense. So, Noam, what's one thing that you're currently worried about?
All right. I'm currently pretty worried about next year. It's not even, I've been saying next year for so long. It's not even next year anymore. It's like in a month. But I currently do not have a job for this coming year. I've been searching for basically this entire year. I've been looking for a job for the coming year, and Corona and everything has obviously made that pretty hard. A lot of places have not been hiring as much. So it's like, it's causing, it's pretty stressful, and we're trying to, be as, have as much faith as possible that things will work out and that, everything is for the best and everything that's happening is, all going to work itself out. But it's just stressful not knowing, not knowing what's going to be. That's stressful and a little bit pretty worrisome. So I would say that's what I'm currently worried about. Something that I used to be worried about. Can I say this podcast?
Yeah.
Like I said, from the beginning, I'm always a little bit, at least at this point, a little bit worried about what people are thinking. So, to come on something like this, which I'm so honored to, have been invited and so happy to come on and talk. And obviously there's an aspect of it that's extremely comfortable talking to you. You're like one of my closest friends. So obviously that makes it a lot easier, but, just knowing that people are going to listen to this and listen to what I'm saying, it's, for the last few days since I knew I was going to come on, it's like, and a lot of my free time, I'm thinking, my mind's turning, and what are you going to say about this? How are you going to word this? So it's nice to like come on and just, once you're here, once I'm talking it out with you, like you said, it's just like talking to one of my boys. So it's been absolute pleasure being here, and it definitely, is something that I'm no longer worried about.
I appreciate that. I think, listen, this podcast is like something that's really special to me, and it's so important. I think it's so important, but it only works if the guests and people who are willing to come on and share so openly and vulnerably as my other guests have, and as you've done here on this podcast. That I'm so grateful that you did, and I think you really did a great job. And I think it's important that you took it so seriously, and it's good to think before you talk, and to have the conviction to still say, and to have that vulnerability to come on here and share your story and to talk about it in such detail, and to really say, hey, I'm going to put myself out there and to go with it. I think it's incredible, man. I'm so appreciative.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. All right. Noam, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Can I have the floor to say one more thing?
You know what? I actually forgot my last question, which is to give the guest the floor. So yes, you have the floor.
Okay. I just want to say one last thing that I knew I wanted to say. Just in terms of vices, and different, it can be anything, people know what theirs is if they have one. People use different things to distract themselves and, to make life easier, quote unquote. And, I think, one of the most important things I ever heard about vices and what's wrong with them, obviously downtime is good, and, having a good time is good. And if you're going to, drink with your friends every so often, I think that's fun and that's a good thing. And if you're going to watch a movie, I think that's good. It's, but when you take those things too far and it's, doing it all the time and it's your entire day, that's when it's an issue, and one thing that I once heard about vices, that I think really changed my whole perception on them and, the approach that needs to be taken towards them is that the problem with them is that a lot of times what you're doing is you're cheating life. You're cheating life in the sense that you are bringing yourself to a heightened state of enjoyment. And this doesn't really apply to, Netflix as a vice, like I said, but, more like drugs and alcohol and that kind of stuff. If anybody struggles with that, what you're doing is you're cheating life, and you're bringing yourself to this enhanced state of enjoyment where things are more fun and enjoyable, and, you don't have to worry as much. And, and the problem with that is that, not only you're cheating life, you're cheating yourself, because a person in this world is more than capable of achieving that level of happiness and of enjoyment and of, being happy with their life and living their everyday, day to day with happiness, and fulfillment. But it takes work, like we spoke about a lot in this conversation. It takes work. It takes real work, but you can get there. Every single person can get there. And the problem with vices like that is that, it becomes too easy. Like we said, it becomes too easy. And, it's like, oh, why would I work hard to achieve happiness if I can just do this other thing that makes me happy and it's so much quicker and easier? So the problem with those things, again, is that you're really cheating yourself and you're cheating life. You're reaching that heightened state of enjoyment without, really working towards it. And in the end, it's really not worth it because it's not real. It's not real. And, we have the ability to make it real. It takes a little bit of work. It takes a little bit of time, but, we really, really all can get there. It's all about the small steps. It's really all about the small steps. And, nobody should think that a small step, isn't a real step and is not doing anything, and that it needs, I know for myself, something I always struggle with, even to this day, is, looking at the big picture and seeing, oh, how am I going to get there? That's so far away. That's so crazy. How am I going to do all that? And really, it's so dangerous because it really holds us back from taking the small steps that we need to take every single day to get where we need to be. And, I would just want to say, not that I think that I'm like such an inspiring person that anybody would want to talk to me, but if anybody would like to talk to me about anything that I spoke about, I would be more than happy to. And, I'm a pretty open person, and, there are certain things that I opted not to speak about on this podcast because, it's being recorded and put online. But, if anybody would like to speak individually, I'd be more than happy to speak more openly about, more specific things. And yeah, dude, I really, really appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you to Noam for coming on to the show. I really enjoyed our conversation. I found it to be really, really insightful. There's a lot that I'm going to take away, and I really do appreciate it. If anybody out there is listening, is interested in reaching out to Noam, you can find him through his Facebook, or you can contact me directly and I'll put you in touch. If you're interested yourself on coming onto the show, or you know of anybody that might be interested, please feel free to have them reach out. I'd love to talk with them. If anybody out there who doesn't feel comfortable coming on to talk about mental health and any struggles that are going on in their life, you can reach out to me as well. I'd be more than happy to talk to you discreetly and privately off the record. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. This movement's very important to me. And I know how important mental health is, and know how hard it can be to talk so openly about it. If you're out there and you know somebody who'd benefit from this podcast, please feel free to share it. If you're not a subscriber yet, please hit that subscribe button, whether it's on Apple or Spotify. We're trying to grow this podcast out. I'm trying to get better every day. If there's any topics that you're interested in hearing me speak about, please reach out, let me know, and we'll definitely get into them. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next week.